8 out of 10 people in medieval Europe were peasants, and among them, women had a spectrum of occupations as real and regulated as any craft today. If you're picturing only spinning and sweeping, park that image by the door. We're going into dairies, ovens, brew yards, markets, and the bright, smoke-scratched air where business was made by hand and measured in shillings, loaves, and pints. Kick the door open and the house hits you like a war. Drum your baby shrieks. The cat's teeth are in the bacon. The dog is tearing strips from a hide. The loaf on the hearth is going black. The pot is foaming itself into a sticky volcano, and the man of the house is complaining as if noise were a job. That chaos wasn't a punchline. It was a checklist. And the scandalous secret hiding in plain sight? The woman of this house has just run in from work. Let's slow the frame and zoom out. Medieval women worked sometimes for their own family, sometimes for a lord, often for straight-up cash, and their labor stitched together the daily survival of villages and cities. First, get dressed for the part. You don't throw on a random sack. You kit up for hard, clean work. The dairymaid's linen is bright and scrubbed because milk curdles at the smell of carelessness. Think soft cloth, sleeves rolled, a head covering to keep hair out of the cream, and hands that stay astonishingly soft despite the grind cream and butter turn out to be the best moisturizers a working woman could ask for. This is one reason the dairymaid gained a reputation, however cheeky, for elegance. Not the milkmaid in the fields with rowdy cowhands and muddy boots. The dairymaid rules the churn, the sieve, the press, and the delicate timing that makes a household both fed and solvent. Morning starts early. No breakfast, just the breath of cold air and the weight of a pail. You lead the cow to her spot, settle onto a stool, and the rhythm works itself into your wrists. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release milk thudding into the bucket with a warm, steady percussion. Back inside, the milk is filtered through cloth to strain out hairs and barn dust, then left to settle. Gravity does the quiet chemistry. Cream rises, milk sinks. Skim the cream for butter. Set the milk aside for cheese. Nothing wasted, nothing flashy, just a choreographed salvage operation in a world where waste is a luxury no one can afford. Butter is honest magic. Put sweet cream in a churn, stir until your shoulders argue with you, and watch the transformation. At first, the cream looks like lotion. Keep going. It thickens into a heavy satin, then all at once, the fat clumps find each other, and the churn gives a little lurch. There it is, the buttermilk breaking free. A pale gush around golden granules. You lift the wooden dasher and grin despite yourself. Butter is seconds away. Wash the grains in cold water, press out the last stubborn pockets of buttermilk, shape the mass, salt it enough to keep it bright, and you've got a product that spreads joy on a crust and coins in a purse. On a rain-lashed afternoon, a thick slice of new bread with a glistening slab of butter is not a snack. It's medicine for the soul. Cheese splits the day into clean halves, curds to eat, whey to use for everything else, bread, pigs, more subtle cooking alchemy. To make it, heat milk gently, add acid, a dash of cider vinegar or the tart, green biting juice called verjuice pressed from sour crab apples, and watch the pot pivot from liquid to delicate lumps. The first moment you stir, it's like watching snowflakes form and fast forward. The curds are tender clouds. The whey turns a sunny gold. Scoop the curds into a cloth, knot it, and press. Weight is your friend. A stone, a wooden press, anything that applies patient force. Hours later, you untie the cloth to a modest round that smells like a meadow. The more carefully you press, the more cleanly the whey runs, the firmer the cheese. Leave it to dry on a shelf, turn it daily, salt it again, wait. On that shelf is a calendar you can eat. Do not underestimate the money in it. Even a poor family with a single cow can spin butter for market and a small wheel of cheese every few days. Scale matters. Some women run operations with many cows, hired milkers to handle mornings and evenings, an assistant to turn cheeses and scour shelves. Step into one of those dairies, and it hums like a workshop. A line of blue-lidded pans for cream, a row of presses, racks of ripening cheeses with a bloom of faint white rind. A ledger nailed to a beam with tally marks for what leaves the door. This is not hobby work. It is a production line powered by judgment and endurance. Money talk, then, and the thudding drumbeat of medieval law. In late 14th century England, a woman dairy worker might earn several shillings a year, less than men in the same broad category, yet undeniably a wage. Cash is freedom, even when rationed. It can buy salt you can't make, vinegar you can't press in winter, a new kettle, a patch of land to lease, a pair of shoes that keep your feet from splitting in frost. A woman who becomes indispensable in a dairy knows it in her bones. The household runs better because she runs it like a craft. Now let's turn to bread, the other half of the body's daily treaty with survival. Bread is so fundamental that whole guilds grow up to police it. Loaf weight and price are regulated down to the ounce, ovens are monitored, fines are handed out for cutting corners. That's not bureaucratic fidgeting, it's because if your baker cheats on weight, children go hungry. Plenty of women bake professionally, and plenty more run hybrid businesses. You knead the dough at home, carry it to a communal oven watched by a baker, pay for the heat and knowledge, pick it up when the crust has gone from raw shine to deep brown. The public oven is the village's heart, and hazards start the fire wrong, and the thatch above you can light up the whole street. And yes, the law bites. Picture a pair of canny bakers drilling a secret hole in their table so someone hiding underneath can pinch lumps from each neighbor's dough. The scraps get remixed into stolen loaves. It's brazen, almost comic, until you realize the theft is measured in dinners denied. When they're caught, the punishment is public and humiliating. Stocks, prison, destruction of the crooked table, the community restored by the raw medicine of spectacle. Medieval justice is a theater with a serious script. Bread is sacred. Even safer bakers work with danger every day. Heat builds in an oven like a silent tide. A moment's inattention, a stray spark, and the thatch on your own roof or your neighbor's brown, dry, and eager becomes a fuse you didn't know you were holding. People invent practical rituals to reduce risk. At night, you rake the embers and cap them with a metal or ceramic hood called a cover fire curfew, from the French couvre-feu, to prevent sparks from soaring up the chimney and taking the village with them. The word we now use for the government telling us to go home began as a woman's last act of the cooking day, a safety habit against catastrophe. Bread and butter call for a drink, and in the Middle Ages that drink is ale, low in alcohol, alive, nourishing. Women brew it at home for family tables, and when they can push scale, for sale. The alewife isn't a punchline. She's an entrepreneur in a hissing, fragrant workshop, where heat, water, and grain turn into something that sells fast because it can't store long. Brewing at scale means heavy labor, hauling water, hoisting sacks of malt, inching a mash paddle through a vat wide enough to swallow you. The work is lucrative enough that some noble households get involved. It's also risky enough to take lives. Somewhere in the records, a brewing maid slips on a wet plank, crashes into the boil, and is pulled out scalded beyond rescue. That's not medieval melodrama. It's exactly how dangerous hot liquid is before guards, rails, and OSHA exist. Flavor is politics. Early on, English ale is spiced with what's at hand grains of paradise, yarrow, gorse blossoms, elderberries, anything to nudge bitter toward levity. Later, merchants push hops across the channel, and a culture war breaks out in pamphlets and market stalls. Hops are blasted as foreign and immoral, the devil's plant, the ruin of good English ale. The argument isn't just taste, it's money and regulation. Hopped beer keeps longer, travels better, and can kneecap local women who rely on fast-selling, small-batch ale. In a town square, you can practically hear the debates crackle, purity of tradition versus the practical chemistry of preservation. Watch the brew. You heat water, steep crushed malt until the liquid goes from clear to tea-dark, then lift the grain out in a cloth that drips like a wrung cloud. The sweet, sticky wort is brought to a boil. Flavors go in when they're in season. Then the liquid is cooled and pitched with Barm the living foam from a previous successful batch. Yeast wakes up, eats sugars, belches CO2, and the surface heaves like a sleeping giant. You keep the vessel loosely covered, a lid but not a seal, because pressure will make a bomb of any arrogance. A day or two, maybe 3 if it's cold, and the yeast has taken its payment in sweetness and paid you back in alcohol. You draw off a clear pint from a little wooden tap and taste the day's work. Not every batch sings, but when it does, the whole room nods. Add up the picture, and you find a ledger of women's competence written across the landscape. In the dairy, the baker's yard, the brew house, at market with a basket of cheeses wrapped in cloth and hope, women negotiate, hire assistants, pay dues, argue prices, count change. They make choices about salt, precious, heavy, sometimes scarce, and about acid sources and fuel. They keep ledgers in memory or ink. They swear by the cow that gives more in spring, by the oven that bakes evenly, by the yeast that behaves like an old friend until it doesn't. They are not exceptions. They are the rule that the official histories too often skip. Walk with me through a day, start to finish, and feel the connective tissue of tasks that looks chaotic until your hands learn the map. Before dawn, milking by lantern, breath ghosting in the air. After dawn, filtering, skimming, setting cream aside, turning yesterday's curds, checking the press weights, washing cloths, because cleanliness is not fancy. It is survival. Mid-morning, knead bread. Watch the dough take the imprint of your knuckles. Fold it toward its own center. Time the rise with the weather. Warm day fast, cold day slow, and decide whether to pay for the baker's heat or risk the fine for baking on your own coals. 2. Feed the baby with a slice of soft cheese. Slice off a hunk for the old man who thatches roofs. Trade a wedge for eggs. Afternoon. Lift mash buckets. The sweet smell of malt hugging your clothes. Boil and stir and mind the fire, because you know in your bones what an unattended spark can cost. Evening. Rack ale, salt butter, scrape the wooden board clean, lay the curfew over the ember bed, and count coins while the last light slides down the wall. Stories twist inside this routine, some comic, some dark. A clever baker's scam ends with a ruined table, and a public shaming because the community is allergic to theft made with a smile. A dairymaid's soft hands mask iron wrists. An alewife's ledger is tidy math that keeps a family from the edge. Guild rules are fussy until you compare them with famine. Taxes are a burden until you remember whose oven never burns the neighborhood. Even words you use today, curfew, carry soot from a medieval hearth. And then there's the market, the stage where labor becomes livelihood. Picture a spine of stalls along a muddy lane. A woman with a wicker basket, she has butter wrapped in leaves to keep it cool, a neat round of fresh cheese with a pressed pattern on top, a small jug of barm promised to a neighbor who wants to experiment with brewing. Across the lane, another woman displays dense loaves that smell of toasted wheat. An alewife sells pints in wooden mugs to men who worked the fields at dawn and to women whose own mornings were just as heavy. The talk is practical. How much for 2? Can you spare a handful of salt? When will the next batch be ready? But beneath it is something sturdier. Trust. This is the real scandal in that opening scene. The somewhere else women were coming back from wasn't a vague outside. It was the workplace. Not a factory with whistles and time cards, those come later, but a set of coordinated spaces where skill earned respect and food kept its promises. The child screams because the day is crowded. The loaf burns because heat is a beast. The pot boils over because someone took her eye off it to answer a paying knock at the door. The husband complains because complaints are cheap. None of that erases the fact that medieval women stood in the very center of production. You don't have to romanticize any of it. Wages were uneven. Legal power tilted hard against women. Safety nets were thin as cobwebs. Yet inside those harsh constraints, strategy bloomed. Seasonality plans, cooperative borrowing, hiring help during peak months, diversifying products, choosing between soft cheese, quick cash, short shelf life, and hard cheese, slow money, long storage. That business sense isn't modern, it's human. If you could step back into that world for one day, you'd hear the same things we still chase. The desire to be needed and to be paid fairly for it. The small thrill when a batch turns out perfectly. The private grief when a risk goes wrong. You'd find women negotiating with officials over weights, arguing down a fine, pulling someone from a boiling vat with bare hands, laughing over spilled buttermilk, and setting a curfew hood with the gentle finality of a ritual that saves lives. By the time we circle back to our opening room, the screaming baby, the cat at the bacon, the loaf, the pot, the complaining, our eyes have adjusted. The scene isn't proof that women belonged only by the hearth. It's evidence that the hearth belonged to the marketplace, the dairy, the oven, the brew yard, and the woman who commanded all four. If you can smell the butter, hear the crust crackle, and feel the rumble of fermentation in a wooden tub, you already know the truth. Medieval women didn't just keep the home fires burning. They ran the engines that fed a civilization, one churn, one loaf, one brew at a time.